I thought I knew what I was going to say until I went through the pre-read for this meeting, which is pretty amazingly terrific. So what I really like to do is if we could all just take 10 minutes of silence to read that document, would really do the trick. So I'll be brief and just try to complement that wonderful document. What I want to emphasize to you is that LCFF and the LCAP process are a gamble. It's a big bet. Particularly from an equity perspective, it's a big bet. The sponsors and the enthusiasts believe that the change in the funding formula, the added local flexibility, and the framework for the LCAP and stakeholder engagement combined will manage to help communities and the state at a higher level more sharply define what equity means and what our goals should be in the coming years and how to get from where we are to where we want to be. Implicit in this is a notion that the LCAP process will transform the politics of education equity from the bottom up. There isn't a lot of evidence to support this particular theory of change. Indeed, there's a lot of evidence that cuts in the other direction. Now, I don't think that means that LCFF and LCAP are doomed to failure. I'm not overwhelmingly pessimistic about it either, because I have medication for that. But I do think what it means is that if it's going to succeed as an experiment, if this conjectural theory of action is to prove valid, people like all of us here in the room really have our work cut out for us. The equity specifics of what districts should try to do are certainly underspecified. The mechanisms for accountability are, at this point, I think it's fair to say that they are aspirational, precatory. If there are teeth in this system to ensure that we achieve equity goals, well, they're dentures that haven't been installed yet. The question that we need to ask, beyond those that are posed in the read-ahead, are really questions, to my mind, of what are the consequences going to be if various actors don't, in fact, deliver on the equity aspirations of LCFF and LCAP. As Jennifer will detail, the early returns in terms of the redirection of resources and especially effective use of those resources tell us that there's not only an equity gap, but there's an implementation gap here. And that implementation gap between what is specifically asked of districts and counties and the reality of what they're doing is very large. Now, it's still early days, and hopefully there will be, let's call it continuous improvement. But there will only be that continuous improvement if there are good data, if there is both an inside and an outside commitment to an equity framework, if we are not only evidence-based but passion-based in our encouragement and, if necessary, criticism of the actors, and if we work hard to bring allies together to make the pressure so intense that the next governor will make mid-course corrections as needed, but push forward at an accelerated pace to narrow the gaps that bring us all together here. Let me just be a little bit more pointed. Just as the federal statute, ESSA, is on its face very weak with respect to the ability of the federal government to kick states in the pants or pantsuits. At the state level here in California, the problem is very similar. And notwithstanding the statutory authorities of the department and the board, there is not a record of intervention and support, and there is very limited capacity for intervention and support for all of the districts that really need to substantially accelerate progress. For the populations, even just those populations identified as LCFF priority subgroups. The implementation is under-resourced. Starting with the state's commitment to collect data and evaluate its own experiment, down to the nitty-gritty of districts having staff to actually sit down with stakeholders and have a meaningful discussion of what should be in the LCAP. Under-resourced on the inside, and of course, as always, under-resourced on the outside among NGOs, the research community. In the coming months, I think now, my read of the evidence so far is that we have a good case to make to go to the governor and the legislature and say, if you want LCFF to be successful, you have to put resources, specific resources into its implementation and its evaluation. The California Collaborative, the CCE that Carl runs, should be 10 times the size that it is, staffed with people who can provide genuine assistance and identify best practices. The stakes are so high for our kids, and we can't let Sacramento wash its hands and just say, oh, now it's a local problem. So what I hope we will get to today, what I know we will get to, and I hope you will leave here with, are some quite specific ideas about how we can advance an equity framework within the implementation of LCFF, and how we can be mindful of the gap between what is asked of districts and what the reality is of what they do, and what the reality is of the willingness of state and county actors to indeed step up, step in, and be smart. In a way, what I'm saying is we have to complement the deregulation of programmatic choices at the local level with a far more vigorous and informed strategy of support and intervention And the groups that work on these issues are critical partners in that process, because bureaucratic pressure alone will not be enough to hold the feet of officials to the fire.